An urgent, breaking report from the deepest shadows of British power reveals that an unprecedented silent coup has just been attempted inside the gilded sanctuaries of Clarence House. A calculated bid for absolute royal authority has sent seismic shockwaves through the ancient monarchy. It began in the oppressive silence of a closed-door morning briefing. King Charles sat alone at his mahogany desk, surrounded by routine schedules and diplomatic correspondence, when his eyes landed on the final document in the file. As he reached the concluding sentence, the atmosphere in the grand room instantly turned to ice. His expression hardened into a mask of pure, unyielding rage. This was no ordinary letter of family reconciliation. It was an ultimatum wrapped in velvet, a cold and sophisticated ambush calculated to hijack the throne during its most vulnerable hour. From her estate in California, Meghan had not merely asked for a modest return to the royal fold. She had issued a terrifying demand: immediate recognition under a protected title linked directly to Princess Catherine's future position. She demanded the immediate activation of the Princess of Wales representative, a restricted emergency designation created solely for a trusted working royal to execute sovereign duties during times of extreme illness or incapacity. In plain terms, it was a brazen attempt to strip authority from the future queen without ever asking permission. Under the guise of modernizing the institution and offering selfless aid, Meghan sought to step directly into Catherine's sacred space while the princess guarded her frail health. Charles removed his glasses with trembling hands, placing them beside the document as the weight of the existential threat settled over him. Catherine's vulnerability was not going to become another person's ruthless opportunity. The king's voice remained low, but the suffocating fury beneath it filled every corner of the locked room. Charles understood with terrifying clarity what was truly at stake. Catherine's position had not been given. It had been painstakingly forged over years of flawless service, absolute discipline, and unwavering sacrifice. To allow an outsider to seize her protected designation would shatter the sanctity of the crown, signaling to the world that Catherine's authority could be severed from her identity and handed to whoever manufactured enough public pressure. And then, the hidden poison within the document surfaced. A highlighted clause revealed that Meghan's operative team in California had already prepared draft announcements for global media distribution. The press releases praised reconciliation and modern duty, written as though the monarch had already surrendered. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Accept the demand, and Meghan would walk back into Buckingham Palace holding official constitutional power. Reject it publicly, and the international narrative would brand the ancient institution as heartless and cruel. Minutes later, Prince William arrived at Clarence House following an urgent, encrypted summons. Stepping into the heavy silence, he found his father standing motionless by the fireplace, his fingers gripping the crisp parchment until his knuckles turned ghostly white. The Prince of Wales instantly recognized the grave shift in the air. This was no petty domestic squabble, but a battle for the survival of his wife's legacy. Charles offered no formal greeting. He looked up, his eyes shattered with dread, and asked a single, devastating question. "Has Catherine seen this?" William's response altered the temperature of the room completely. Catherine had indeed read the document, and as her eyes swept across the page, a cold terror took hold. She recognized the precise, technical wording. Those exact constitutional phrases had been spoken once before during a clandestine confrontation the royal family believed had been buried forever. To grasp the true danger of this hour is to understand the raw, emotional abyss opened by those few forbidden words. For the king, the request was a direct challenge to his sovereign command. For William, it was an intolerable attack on the woman he loved. For Catherine, holding the proposal in her trembling hands, it reopened a deep, unhealed wound she had suffered in silence. The Princess of Wales did not scream or explode in rage when she spoke to William in private. Her voice was faint, heavy with agonizing fatigue. She looked into her husband's eyes and asked why every period of her human weakness was treated like an empty chair waiting for someone else to claim. Her reduced schedule had been designed to protect her health, not to invite a scheming rival into the authority she had built through years of discipline. William fought to conceal his burning fury,
knowing that this demand was not an offer of help, but a predatory attempt to steal the trust and historic standing Catherine had earned. The shadows deepened inside the private apartments of Windsor Castle as Queen Camilla urged caution, warning that an aggressive rejection would ignite a catastrophic public war that could consume the fragile stability of the monarchy. But in the cold calculus of sovereign survival, restraint was being weaponized against them. The true turning point came when Princess Anne entered the emergency briefing, carrying a classified security dossier that transformed a painful family dispute into a high-stakes intelligence breach.
Her sharp, authoritative voice cut through the hesitation. How had an exiled royal living 4,000 miles away in California acquired the precise, highly restricted legal phrasing of a constitutional title known only to the sovereign, his immediate heir, and a tiny circle of constitutional advisors? The answer lay buried in a forgotten afternoon 18 months earlier, a day Catherine remembered with sickening clarity. It was during a private investiture rehearsal within the secure confines of Windsor Castle, where senior royals and constitutional scholars had gathered to review emergency succession protocols. These were the darkest contingency plans, designed to preserve the continuity of the crown if catastrophe or sudden illness ever prevented the senior royals from fulfilling their sovereign duties. Catherine had listened as the chief advisor explained the restricted mechanics of the Princess of Wales representative. Then, without warning, the heavy oak doors had opened, and Meghan had walked in under the pretext of seeking an urgent audience with the king. She stayed just long enough to absorb every vital detail, her eyes tracking every document on the table. When Meghan had asked why someone residing outside the United Kingdom could not hold such a designation, Catherine's response had been quiet, controlled, and lethal. Royal representation required unbroken trust, dedicated service, and constitutional accountability to the crown. Distance was not the barrier. Integrity was. William had stepped between them to terminate the exchange before restraint completely collapsed, but the damage was already done. Hours later, a palace archivist noted that a confidential briefing folder had been briefly moved. Now, Princess Anne produced the reopened security log. Meghan had spent 11 unaccounted minutes outside the constitutional briefing room. 11 minutes during which the inner mechanism of Catherine's future authority had been methodically extracted. With Catherine's lingering fears confirmed, King Charles realized that formal correspondence was no longer enough to contain the crisis. This was an existential strike against the throne, and it had to be met face-to-face. A secure, encrypted satellite line was established between Windsor Castle and Santa Barbara, isolated from every external network. There were no press secretaries, no legal advisors, and no buffers. Charles sat alone at the heavy table, while William stood in the darkened background just beyond the camera's view, a silent witness to a historic confrontation. When Meghan's screen activated, her expression was calm, radiating a cold confidence born of the belief that she held the upper hand. The king offered no preamble. His voice dropped to a low, razor-sharp register as he demanded to know why she had dared to construct a demand around Catherine's protected title without her consent. Meghan attempted to reframe the assault as an act of selfless devotion, insisting she was offering stability and relief while the princess remained in seclusion. But Charles saw the predator beneath the polished rhetoric. Leaning forward into the camera, his eyes burning with quiet fury, he cut her off. Protection does not begin by exploiting another woman's physical vulnerability. The psychological battle reached its terrifying peak when Meghan referred to Catherine's reduced schedule as unused authority, waiting for modern leadership. That single, callous phrase shattered the king's remaining patience. Charles struck the heavy desk once with the side of his hand, a sharp, echoing blow that reverberated through the room. "Catherine," he roared softly, "is a human being, not an empty seat to be claimed as abandoned property." Caught off guard, Meghan finally revealed the hidden hand behind her plot. A disgraced former palace communications consultant had reconstructed the legal language and guaranteed that the crown would break under public pressure. William stepped into the frame, his face an unyielding wall of ice. He informed her that the legal claim was completely invalid, and that no king could sever Catherine's office without her explicit permission. Realizing her subtle trap had failed,
Meghan dropped all pretense. Before the secure connection was cut, she issued a parting threat. Her California strategy team was prepared to leak the proposal to major global networks, forcing the monarchy into an impossible public fight. Late that night, within the claustrophobic confines of a soundproof council chamber at Windsor Castle, the final reckoning took place. No advisors, legal aides, or press secretaries were permitted inside. Only 4 figures sat around the ancient oak table: King Charles, Prince William, Princess Anne, and Princess Catherine. The atmosphere was thick with emotional suppression and the terrifying weight of historic responsibility. Charles opened the emergency council, his voice strained under the agony of a monarch forced to choose between the preservation of the crown and the love of his child. William sat with jaw clenched, his knuckles white against the dark wood, while Catherine remained poised, her face an unyielding portrait of silent resilience. They were assembled not to negotiate, but to pass judgment on a betrayal that threatened the very bedrock of the royal line. Princess Anne broke the tense silence, placing a thick, black-bound security report onto the center of the table with a dull, heavy thud. Investigators had meticulously traced the precise legal phrasing in Meghan's demand back to a former palace communications consultant, a retired insider who had retained confidential briefing notes after leaving royal service. Phone records and encrypted message logs confirmed recent, secretive contact between that consultant and Meghan's inner circle. The forbidden title had not been uncovered by chance. It had been methodically exhumed and weaponized. Anne looked directly into her brother's eyes, her voice cold and unsparing as she declared that royal service was built on discipline and accountability, not global publicity campaigns or relentless psychological coercion. A haunting silence fell over the room. King Charles rose slowly from his seat, walking over to a carved mahogany cabinet where a framed photograph of Harry and Meghan rested in the shadows. He picked it up with trembling fingers, gazing down at the faces of his younger son and daughter-in-law for several agonizing seconds. The pain in his eyes was unbearable, the unspoken tragedy of a father watching his last hope for reconciliation dissolve into ashes. Without a word, the king turned the photograph face down on the shelf, the soft click echoing like a gavel falling in a courtroom. The symbolic gesture was absolute. The father's sentimentality had yielded to the king's uncompromising duty. Turning back to the table, Charles looked at Catherine and asked the ultimate question. What did she require? Catherine spoke without a single tremor in her voice, her words piercing the solemnity of the chamber. She stated plainly that her protected title could never become a bridge for someone who had repeatedly undermined the monarchy, only to demand its authority when personal relevance faltered. She reminded Charles that while he was a grieving father, he was first and foremost the sovereign, and mercy toward one child could not come at the devastating cost of another family member's dignity. William's restraint finally broke, his voice sharp with fierce conviction as he declared that every past compromise had merely paved the way for another outrageous demand. While the council finalized its decree, 4,000 miles away in California, the sinister mechanics of the plot unraveled. Before dawn broke over London, Meghan's team initiated their media strike, leaking the proposal to an American broadcaster to frame it as a selfless offer of help. But inside the Montecito estate, an explosive domestic crisis erupted. Harry, reading the complete text of the public leak for the first time, pushed his chair back violently, staring at his wife in sheer disbelief. He confronted her, demanding to know why his name had been attached to an ultimatum he had never sanctioned. When Meghan confessed that her consultant assured her the king would surrender under public pressure, Harry realized with sickening clarity that he had been used as leverage in a calculated campaign for institutional power. Back at Windsor, before the king attached his royal seal to the final decree, Catherine requested one last private audience with Charles. Stepping into his sitting room alone, she urged him to separate Meghan's ruthless ambition from Harry's tragic foolishness. She insisted that while Meghan must be permanently banished from royal service, a narrow, private path of communication must remain open for a father and his son. Moved by her extraordinary nobility, Charles signed the absolute executive order, permanently stripping the protected designation from all contingency plans and closing every institutional door forever.
Catherine had not merely defended her rightful crown, she had triumphed over psychological warfare with absolute grace, leaving the conspirators defeated in the dark. As dawn broke over the ancient spires of London, a cold and decisive quiet settled across Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle. The storm that had threatened to tear the monarchy apart had passed, leaving behind a hard, uncompromising reality. The formal statement issued by Buckingham Palace was brief, pristine, and mercilessly final. Buckingham Palace confirmed that no person residing outside the working monarchy could ever hold, share, or temporarily exercise authority connected to the Princess of Wales. The public narrative, once manipulated by frantic press leaks and calculated media campaigns, inverted within hours. Front-page headlines across the world echoed the stern verdict of the Crown, declaring that Catherine's title was not an empty chair to be claimed by ambient ambition or opportunistic pressure. The entire gambit had collapsed, exposing the ultimate weakness of public relations tactics when pitted against the immovable, ancient weight of constitutional law. 4,000 miles away, in the quiet isolation of Montecito, the silence was suffocating and absolute. The grand illusions of global influence, institutional leverage, and calculated modern service had vanished like mist. Meghan found herself confronting the ultimate loss of power, a total, permanent banishment from the inner machinery of the British Crown. Every door that had once stood slightly ajar was now bolted shut by royal decree. There would be no temporary return, no security privileges, no shared patronages, and no ceremonial glory borrowed from another woman's years of quiet sacrifice. The realization was fatalistic. Media pressure could produce fleeting headlines, but it could never forge genuine royal authority. In attempting to force her way back into the center of the crown, she had permanently sealed her own exile, leaving behind only the bitter echo of a throne that refused to bend. For Prince Harry, the aftermath carried the unbearable, heartbreaking weight of irreversible tragedy. Standing among the ruins of a failed campaign, he was forced to contemplate the total destruction of his standing within his family. The realization that his genuine desire for family reconciliation had been weaponized into leverage for a constitutional assault shattered his spirit. Though King Charles had heeded Catherine's noble plea, keeping a single, fragile private line open for his younger son, the institutional separation was absolute.
Harry faced the bleak, eternal truth that while he remained a son, his place within the history, honor, and formal service of the realm was erased forever. The homeland he loved and the family he longed to reunite with were now separated from him by a vast ocean of broken trust that no passage of time could ever mend. Inside the royal household, there was no victory celebration or triumphant pride, only the solemn, heavy acceptance of new and daunting burdens. King Charles walked the quiet galleries of Windsor with the measured stride of a monarch who had sacrificed his personal desires to preserve the continuity of the realm. His reign would forever bear the scar of this confrontation, a stark testament to the painful demands of sovereign duty. Prince William and Princess Catherine emerged from the fire as the undisputed, unbreakable core of the monarchy's future. For Catherine, the protection of her designation was not a personal conquest, but a sacred trust to be guarded with unyielding discipline. She returned to her duties with quiet grace, carrying the emotional fatigue of a woman who had successfully defended her identity and her children's heritage from the brink of usurpation. In the vast sweep of history, thrones do not fall to external enemies. They collapse when those inside the fortress surrender authority out of fatigue or misplaced mercy. By drawing an absolute line in the dark, the House of Windsor preserved the ancient sanctity of the realm, proving that royal authority is not a commodity to be bargained for, but a sacred duty forged through discipline, restraint, and sacrifice. The heavy oak doors that swung shut on that fateful night will remain locked for generations, a dark and powerful reminder that power, once betrayed, can never be demanded back. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe to the channel so you never miss an episode, and we will see you in the next documentary.